This is the photo of the greenhouse as it looked before we actually moved it onto our property. It was a Lord and Burnham greenhouse, which is like the elite of the elite greenhouses. This one was built approximately 50 years ago for a dedicated rhododendron hybridizer who's long since passed away. So the county purchased the property for a nature preserve and planned on demolishing the greenhouse. So we were able to purchase it and save it from demolition. But that wasn't such an easy task. It involved, first of all, renting a huge truck, and then we enlisted the help of several of our loyal friends during a wet, cold month of October. It was October of 2011. And Kevin actually wondered what he'd gotten himself into. But it was a challenge, and he decided to go through with it. So the first steps were to remove all of the glass panes, starting from the top down to the sides. And this involved unscrewing hundreds of nuts and bolts along the aluminum panels that held in the glass panels. The photos don't show this, but it was actually raining that day, and the glass was slippery and hard to handle. We lost lots of panes of glass from breakage, either by slipping from our slippery hands or just trying to get them free. And so next we had to disassemble the aluminum framing. And finally, after about 5 hours, we were able to get it all apart and load it into the big truck. So we took pictures as we went along, and we wrote down notes and took measurements and just hoped that later on we'd be able to put it all back together again. So we drove the truck back to our property and then unloaded all of the aluminum into the driveway and the glass panes, which we temporarily put in our garage. And so it stayed there for several months until we were able to kind of get our wits about us and tackle the challenge of putting it all back together again, which we weren't sure we were going to be able to do. Well, the first thing we had to do was get the site ready, and that meant taking out a number of huge Douglas fir trees. We're talking about, trees are over 150 feet tall, and it meant bringing in the professional tree people. And so once they took down the trees and cut them up in chunks, we then had to figure out what to do with all that wood. So then the next thing is we had to dig out the footprint of the greenhouse, which was about 21 feet by 14 feet, and it had to be dug out about 3 feet deep. Not only was that a lot of work to do by hand, but also figuring out what to do with all the dirt. And so next we needed to bring electric power to the greenhouse, and that meant digging a trench all the way around the house, the greenhouse, down through from our house down through the forest, through the nature trails and across the road to the greenhouse. And that took a few days of hand digging for sure. After that was done, it was time to get the foundation work started. And so we needed to square up the measurements and find a contractor who would, help us pour the concrete foundation. And we were lucky to find an incredible foundation contractor that normally did high-end homes, but after talking to him, he decided to help us out because we looked like we desperately needed it. So he put in the wood forms for the concrete foundation first, and then the forms for the knee walls next. And then the concrete truck came, and the crew showed up, and they worked with precision. It was a wonder to see. The final product was breathtaking, and it was like a piece of art. And then after that, we began to push forward, or Kevin did, measuring and cutting and putting in external insulation around the outside of the foundation to keep the greenhouse, warmer in the winter. And then there was the drainage tubing that we had to put in around the perimeter of the foundation to divert, the rainwater away from the greenhouse. Next, there were 2 doors that we wanted to install, and so we shopped everywhere for them and finally found perfect ones at Home Depot. They have glass on the top half, and then that glass disappears down inside the door when you want to open up the screens. I don't know exactly understand how it works, but sort of like magic. You just and it also has locks and very fancy door handles. So of course, before you can put up the doors, you have to install the aluminum base framework. And Kevin used lots of fancy cutting tools from the shop, but being the scientist genius that he is, he could figure out anything like that. It was fairly easy, including making sure the doors are square. And then our friend Bob and our neighbor's son Shane were there to help out. Then they started erecting the aluminum beams. It required several sets of hands, so we enlisted another friend, Ben, along with Bob and Shane. And there were dozens of, or I guess a dozen, overhead angled beams that needed to go up at the same time. It was a little tricky, to say the least. And I was there with Missy for morale support. And next were the roof ventilation louvers that had to be installed. And Kevin enlisted the help of Ben and another neighbor, Gary. And the three of them were able to get the long aluminum beams in place in unison and insert the polycarbonate panels in the roof and the glass on the sides. And then on Christmas Eve, Kevin fit the glass pieces into the side panels, and I had my present completed by Christmas. I felt like the luckiest person on earth. I really wanted to get the greenhouse done, or he really wanted to get the greenhouse done for me by Christmas. So after all that hard work, we realized that there were still a couple of tall Douglas firs that were still looming above the greenhouse, and Kevin couldn't fathom the thought of one of those limbs coming down in a storm and completely destroying all his hard work. So we decided to have a couple of them taken down, and oh Lord, did that create a lot more work for us. So the next we needed to focus on the inside of the greenhouse, and that meant, putting down a pest barrier. We wanted to make sure that rodents couldn't dig inside the greenhouse. So we laid down a layer of hard cloth, that steel mesh, along the floor of the greenhouse. And then we covered that with landscape cloth. And then Kevin applied a layer of gravel as a base for the pavers. And of course I designed a nice artistic design for the floor, incorporating 16-inch aggregate concrete pavers with kind of a nice design stripe of reddish 6-inch square pavers. And all of them had to be laid level and straight. So it was the middle of January with snow on the ground, and it was bitterly cold. And we must have gone through a box of hand warmers and used the propane patio heaters to keep us, warm and dry. But all the discomfort was worth it, as a result, because it made a beautiful greenhouse floor. We almost could have eaten, candlelight dinner on it that night. So there's my greenhouse, all done inside and out, so beautiful and ready for plants. And there was no holding back. The plants couldn't get in fast enough. So you build it, and they will come, and they came in droves. We had over 30 garden clubs come tour the garden this spring, and every one of them wanted to walk through the greenhouse. It was glorious.